You know that feeling when someone asks you where you want to eat, and your first instinct isn't to think about what you want, it's to think about what they want. And then you say, I don't mind, you pick. And you mean it. Not because you don't have a preference, but because somewhere deep down, having a preference feels dangerous. That's not flexibility. That's not being easygoing. That is a survival strategy. And today I want to talk about where it actually comes from, because people-pleasing is not a personality trait. It is a trauma response with a name, a mechanism, and a cost that most women have never been taught to calculate. In psychology, there are 4 widely recognized trauma responses. You've probably heard of 3 of them: fight, flight, and freeze. But there's a 4th one that doesn't get nearly enough attention, and it's called fawn. The fawn response was first named by psychotherapist Pete Walker, and it describes what happens when a person learns, usually very early in life, that the safest way to survive a threatening environment is to make the threatening person happy. Not to run, not to fight back, not to shut down, but to become so agreeable, so accommodating, so perfectly attuned to what the other person needs that there is no reason for them to hurt you. If you grew up in a home where a parent's mood dictated the weather, where you could feel the tension the second you walked through the door and your entire body reorganized itself around managing that tension, this is probably where it started. You learned to read faces before you learned to read books. You learned that the right answer wasn't the honest answer. It was the one that kept things calm. You learned that your safety depended not on being yourself, but on being useful. And the thing about the fawn response is that it works. That's the cruel part. It actually works. The parent calms down. The teacher likes you. The friend group keeps you. The boyfriend stays. You get the outcome you need, which is the absence of conflict. And because it works, your brain logs it as the correct strategy. Not a temporary fix, not a compromise. The way to be. So you carry it forward into every friendship, every workplace, every relationship. You become the woman who always says yes, who picks up the extra shift, who listens for 2 hours on the phone and never mentions that she's also having a terrible week, who edits her opinions in real time based on the room she's in, who hasn't said no cleanly, without an apology, without an excuse, without a 3-paragraph justification, in as long as she can remember. And everyone around you thinks you're just nice. Let me be clear about something. There is nothing wrong with being kind. There is nothing wrong with generosity or warmth or caring about people. But there is a difference, a vast, important psychological difference between kindness that comes from choice and kindness that comes from fear. One is a value. The other is a cage. And if you cannot tell which one is operating in any given moment, that itself is information. Dr. Harriet Breaker, a clinical psychologist, wrote extensively about what she called the disease to please. Her work showed that chronic people-pleasing is not driven by compassion. It is driven by anxiety. Specifically, it's driven by a deeply held belief that your worth is conditional, that you are only safe, only loved, only allowed to take up space, as long as you are giving something. The moment you stop giving, the moment you need something, the moment you are inconvenient, that's when you get left. That belief didn't come from nowhere. Someone taught you that. Maybe not with words, maybe with silence, maybe with withdrawal, maybe with the particular kind of quiet disappointment that a child reads as, I have made a mistake by having a need. But you were taught it, and you learned it perfectly. Here's what people-pleasing actually costs. And I want to be specific, because the costs are so normalized that most women don't even register them anymore. It costs you your preferences. Not because you don't have them, but because you've suppressed them so automatically that you genuinely cannot access them when asked. It costs you your anger, Because anger requires you to believe you have been wronged, and you have been trained to assume that you are the one who is wrong. It costs you your rest, because rest means someone else might have to pick up what you put down, and that thought alone produces a guilt so immediate, it doesn't even feel like guilt anymore. It just feels like who you are. And it costs you your relationships. Not because people leave, but because they never actually meet you. They meet the performance. They meet the version of you that has already calculated what they want and adjusted accordingly. And when someone falls in love with that version, you are left with a horrible, quiet knowledge that sits underneath everything. If they knew the real me, the one with needs and opinions and bad days, they wouldn't stay. That is the loneliest thing a person can feel inside a relationship. To be loved and still believe you are unleavable only as long as you keep performing. Researcher Dr. Tend and Befriend theory, developed by psychologist Shelley Taylor, offers another lens here. Taylor's work showed that women under stress don't default to fight or flight the way the original research, which was conducted almost entirely on men, suggested. Women are more likely to respond to threat by tending, nurturing those around them, and befriending, strengthening social bonds as a form of protection. This is partly hormonal, linked to oxytocin, and partly socialized. But the point is this: women are not just culturally trained to prioritize others under stress. They are biologically nudged toward it. And when you layer socialization on top of biology, what you get is a woman who will set herself on fire to keep a room warm and call it instinct. And the people around her will let her. That's the part that doesn't get said enough. People-pleasing doesn't just happen inside you. It is maintained by every person who benefits from it and never asks what it costs you. The partner who enjoys a woman who never pushes back. The friend who takes and calls it closeness. The workplace that rewards the woman who volunteers for everything and calls her a team player, while paying her the same as the man who does exactly his job and nothing more. The system doesn't just create people-pleasers, it relies on them. So what do you do with this? First, you learn to notice the flinch. That micro moment before you say yes, where something in your chest tightens and you override it. That is not enthusiasm. That is the fawn response activating. You don't have to act on it immediately. You just have to start seeing it. Because you cannot change a pattern you are still mistaking for your personality. Second, you practice the smallest possible no. Not the dramatic boundary, not the confrontation. The tiny, boring, unglamorous no. I can't make it tonight. I'd rather not. Let me think about it. No explanation, no apology, no performance of regret. Just the word, sitting there on its own, being enough. Third, and this is the hard one, you let people be disappointed in you. Not because you want them to be, but because the alternative is a life where you contort yourself into whatever shape keeps everyone comfortable, and you wake up at 40 or 50 or 60 and realize that the person you've spent the least time taking care of is you. You were not born to manage other people's emotions. You were trained to. And anything you were trained to do, you can, slowly and imperfectly, and with a lot of grace toward yourself, unlearn. In the next video, we're talking about boundaries. Specifically, why setting them makes you feel guilty, even when you know you're right. Because if this episode described the pattern, that video is about what happens when you try to break it, and why your own brain fights you on it. If this one hit home, send it to the friend who always says yes. Subscribe so you're here for the next video. I'll see you then.